Welcome to this episode of Pathways to Peace. Today we are diving into an incredibly important, timely topic, forcing meaningful dialogues about race and racism in schools. We are thrilled to have Lucretia, a project leader for Sustained Dialogues program. Could you give a brief overview of what the Sustained Dialogues program is?
Yes, so hi Nandi, thanks for having me on the podcast today. Sustained dialogue is exactly what the name says. We go into communities, we forge relationships with the stakeholders in communities to further the work of dialoguing and to foster social cohesion. And building relationships so that we can sustain the work that we do at IJR through community leaders.
Okay. So, how can schools create safe spaces for open dialogue about race and racism?
Yeah. So Nandi, I think what's important is that we need to understand what safe spaces are. Firstly, we want to create a space where learners feel comfortable in expressing themselves, their opinions, their thoughts. It must be a space that has clear ground rules in terms of what do we say in the space. So it must be a space where people don't feel threatened, where they don't feel judged. It must be a space where learners feel that I am seen and I am heard. A space that, where they can be themselves and open up their opinions to their peers. And then ways in which schools can create that space for learners is in the classroom. So teachers can create a space where there are ground rules, where learners can talk about discussions. They can have talks on the field, so they can maybe do outside walking talks. That's what we call it. We do those in communities as well. I think really good teachable moments are, when they're on the sports field and the PT teacher or PE teacher will see something happening on the sports field that is maybe discriminating or prejudice, and at that very moment address those issues and have a discussion around that. So there are ways in which they can do that. Going to places of interest and talk about the history of South Africa and open up a discussion about the legacies of apartheid and how things are today and why they're still like that and where it comes from. I think it's important for learners to talk about those things. So those are some of the ways in which they can create spaces.
What role do parents and the broader community play in fostering or hindering social cohesion in schools, particularly in the context of with the history of racial tension?
Okay. They play, I think, a very, very important role in how children's view of the world is shaped, and what is done in the home will then show us how children respond to the world and to people around them. So parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles, cousins, teachers, community leaders, they are the child's first teacher. And in the home, children learn by seeing what parents and grandparents and family do. So if there's prejudice in the home, then the kids are going to think that that's normal behavior, and that is something that they are going to then display in the classroom, on the sports field, wherever they find themselves. And so how parents or what parents teach children, I think is really, really important. And the values that they teach children, how they respond, I think the non-verbal communication in how they respond to people and groups of people, especially people who are different to themselves, is very important, because they are at that point showing children and teach them how to interact with those groups of people. So I think parents should be very, very mindful of what they are teaching their children, verbally and non-verbally, in terms of how we deal with people who are different to ourselves.
Can you explain why acknowledging intergenerational trauma is critical in your work?
Yeah, I think, we see trauma and woundedness in our society today, which are manifesting through anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, gangsterism. A lot of these are things and the legacies of apartheid that has been internalized in people, and sometimes people don't even know that they are dealing with trauma and woundedness, but we see that in our society, and IJR wants to create spaces where we can surface the trauma and the woundedness, because if it's not dealt with, it will be perpetuated within society. It will also, be passed down to other generations in terms of how we think and how we treat people, and in our behaviors as well. So I think it's important that we create a space for people to surface the trauma, and then find ways of how to deal with that trauma so that we can heal our communities and societies.
Does the Sustained Dialogues program ensure that dialogues remain productive and lead to tangible rather than just discussions?
So Nandi people are really just very tired of talk shops, and they want to see things done to better their communities and themselves. So in Sustained Dialogues, what we've done in the past is I've been involved with the late Stan Henkeman in a project called Teaching Respect for All, where we went around speaking to teachers about their woundedness and how we can foster respect and dignity within schools. And I think that was a really important project because it allowed teachers to see what their own blind spots are. And before we can ask teachers to talk about healing the wounds of the past or teaching children about anti-discrimination, we need to deal with our own prejudice, we need to deal with our own biases. So having these programs help teachers to surface those things, to deal with it, so that they could have these very productive and proactive conversations about race within the classroom. So my colleagues in the Sustained Dialogue program, they have a very important process, and part of the methodology is emergent learning, and through conversations they would ask pertinent questions to surface issues that are happening in the community and how the community can use their own agency in order to address those issues. They deal with advocacy as well. So once they've surfaced the issues, dealt with the issues, they can then advocate with the municipalities and the government officials or organizations working in those areas that can help address the issues in those communities. So it's to give them the opportunity to use their agency to make a change in their communities and foster social cohesion. They have a very good program called the Ambassador Program, where they work with these ambassadors over a number of years, and the ambassadors eventually take over the conversations in the community around race and racism, and also help to foster social cohesion. We need to foster respect for others in our community. We're a society that's very different in so many ways, and we need to learn how to live together. We need to, children need to understand that even though we are different to each other, we have a common humanity. We have the right to dignity. We have a constitution that protects the rights and the dignity of others. And so just as much as I would like to be valued, I need to value others. And sometimes our children are not learning that at home. There are prejudices at home. The values in every home is different. And yes, we don't want to give the teachers more work to do, but it is important that if children are not getting it at home, that we need to create a platform, and school is the next best platform in which to do that. Having said that, it is also important that our teachers are trained in these conversations. As we spoke earlier, teachers have their own prejudice and their own bias. And if we're saying that teachers are going to be creating the platform in classrooms and at schools, then we need to give them the training that they need to have these conversations so that teachers can deal with their own prejudice and their own biases firstly. So I think it's important. School is an important platform, but there are so many facets that we have to consider before that is instituted.
Thank you so much, Lucretia, for joining us.